Look out!
Surging up from the depths of the sea.
Horrifying, mysterious creatures whose attack on people sends the whole countryside on an endless search.
Unless something is done, and done quickly.
Is this the end of our civilization?
You'll pioneer with us the perilous descent into the unknown.
Yeah, what does that mean? What are you even talking about?
A deep, penetrating dive.
In the last calm and reflective moment, before the monsters came.
Humanoids from the deep dive.
Welcome to the podcast Humanoids from the Deep Dive, where we dig deep into the meanings and contexts of your favorite monsters and monster movies. Each episode we'll see guests and myself give our take on an important movie, monster, and or film, and what we think it means using everything from history and philosophy to films and folklore. Today's episode, we will be diving into the monsters of the biggest contemporary working author in horror for decades. Someone who has influenced pretty much every horror lover I can even think of, Stephen King. Fans of the show can find us on Spotify, Google, iTunes, Podbean. Basically, if you can find a podcast there, you can find us. And you can follow us on Twitter at HFT Deep Dive. I'm your host, Jeff Ewing. I write for Forbes and Looper on genre film with bylines and Shudder and all over the place. And I've co-edited books and written chapters on everything from Alien and the Devil to Frankenstein, hell. Basically, if it's monsters, I am obsessed with it. And I'm very, very, very pleased to introduce our special guest, the host of an excellent, one of my favorite podcasts, other than my own, on the Fangoria network, Kingcast, Scott Wampler and Eric Vespe.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here, gentlemen.
Yes, of course. Happy to be invited.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Big monster nerds. So didn't have to twist our arm much on this one.
Yeah, I was just like, okay, I want to talk some Stephen King beasties, and there's a very small list of people I'm like, I know who I want on my first show on this topic.
Right. Well, we are honored to be making that maiden voyage with you.
Right. And I was under the impression this was a Merchant Ivory podcast. So yes. I did a whole bunch of really wrong research. It's not going to pay off here, I think.
You know what? Just throw it in there. We'll make it as chaotic as possible in the edit.
Want to talk about a period romance with Anthony Hopkins and Vanessa Redgrave? I'm your man.
I was going to say that's really weird because I have 8 pages of notes about the remains of the day. And so we came to that independently.
It's just kind of funny. When I was first starting, deciding what type of podcast I wanted, for about a week, I was going to do Highlander romances.
So like the most niche thing I could possibly
exactly imagine. I'm like, Is that should I scale that back again?
You'd be a big fish in a small pond if you'd done that one.
Yeah, that is true. That is very true.
Although to be fair, I thought that was our brilliant idea when we were like, oh, we're going to start a podcast. You know, we're movie guys, but there's a billion movie podcasts. So what would we do? We also love Stephen King. Why don't we do a Stephen King podcast? Surely there aren't at least 4 dozen of those. And we started that, and suddenly we're like, can't use that title because there's already 3 podcasts with that title. How about How about this title? Oh, nope, that title's taken too by the other 4 podcasts that I didn't know existed.
That's probably the most protracted debate in behind the scenes Kingcast history was what to call the fucking thing. It went on for wait, can I swear on the show?
Yes, you can.
Okay. I should use
too late.
Up front. Yeah, I've gotten in trouble for that.
We'll just add extra swear words if you don't swear, so it's fine.
Oh, you're not going to have a problem with that, baby.
Bleep out the non-swears.
I got it bleeped on a show once, and I didn't realize really how much I swear until I was hearing all the bleeps. You know, I was like, God damn, dude, I got to tone that shit down, dude. Yeah. Yeah, we spent weeks going back and forth on the title. Like, you know, I was getting friends and family involved. Like, what do you call this goddamn thing? You know, and then it was like the most simplest thing was the right answer.
Yeah, I mean the elegance I think is good. It's a good title. It is. Like
there is a Stephen King cast, and they're good. I like those guys. And I was concerned it might be too similar. But they've been very, very friendly to us. You know, didn't feel that way, and thank God because I didn't want to be a dick.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I was
you
very
know,
fortunate because I wanted to do like I mean, I wanted to do a horror podcast, but there are a lot of those, um, and so I wanted to do. Well, I really love monsters and literary monsters and movie monsters, folklore, all that stuff. So I thought, well, there must not be that many like ones devoted specifically to monsters, and there are far less than there are specifically horror ones. But there are more than I realized when I started. But they've all similarly been just super great.
mm-hmm.
It's a very supportive community, by and large. You know, there's always going to be some egos here or there, but like I can't tell you how pleasant it was to kind of wade into the waters, especially in the horror community. It's you would think that of all the fandoms that would be like the creepiest one to wade into, but horror fans are just like the nicest, coolest people, and, you know, and Star Wars fans not so much anymore. Comic book movie fans not so much.
No fucking way would I have done a Star Wars podcast. Oh my god.
Oh yeah, you're just like, and today's episode is on I don't Luke Skywalker is cool. Like, what topic do you hit where you're not going to get in the mentions? You know,
here's our month-long examination of Ellen Sleazebag-Gano from from Attack of the Clones.
Like,
is that how you say it? I thought it was I thought it was Sleazebagano.
Well, hey, you put the emphasis where you want to, baby. It's
well, I mean,
it is all things to all people.
Sleazebagano. I guess you could say it that way. And
Bagano works too.
Now. Yeah.
I mean, there is a character in Star Wars that George Lucas named Sleazebag, and he sells drugs. So that's
extremely subtle, that one.
And all these Star Wars fans say that Disney ruined everything. I'm just saying.
Look, all I'm saying is you can't, like, unless fans have done the restoration, you can't get the ones without the weird additions and insertions.
That's true. So,
like, you know what? We're fine. It's fine. Everything is equally chaotic and all is good. So by way of just general introduction to the topic, because I mean, does Stephen King even need an introduction right now? Not really. But he became a phenomenon. I mean, not early in terms of his writing, because his first published novel was his fourth novel, but Carrie, and but then once that hit, a lot, he just kept basically pumping out stuff, and it kept becoming bestsellers. And not everything was equally, you know, especially in the early years, not everything was like equally Carrie banger level, but in terms of like what it sold. But he's basically been publishing between, like, on average, probably 2 to 3 novels a year since the 70s.
Yeah, late 70s, early 80s, because that's when Richard Bachman stuff started coming out concurrently with Stephen King stuff, and the whole reason for the pen name was because his publisher was like, dude, you can't release 2 books a year because you're going to saturate the market. Like, that's not how we do things. And so he was just like, well, fuck that. I got all these books that I want to put out there. And
I do what I want.
Yeah, I do what I want. So he started his own, you know, a pen name, and with a different publisher. And that's where the Richard Bachman stuff all came from. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. He's definitely like, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, that's it. I was just saying he's a very prolific dude. So, you know, that,
yeah.
Believe you me, we know very well just how many books this dude has written. And you're like, we're going to start a Stephen King podcast. Well, you know, this is going to be, you know, a great little examination of 70 something titles plus all the adaptations. All right, this is gonna be a real trek.
Are we gonna run out of material? No, like by the time you've recorded, you know, 40 episodes, he will have written like almost as many books. So you're good.
That was like the number one question when we started out, was what happens when you run out of adaptations to talk about. But, you know, there's roughly 60 of them. And as we speak, there are another 25 plus in some stage of development. And we're never going to run out, is the truth. We might run out of things to say about some of these movies.
That is possible. But that's when
And I
we'll lean
think
on our guests. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that we're as the show has gone on, you know, I mean, important to note, we're not just doing these main feed episodes. We're also doing weekly episodes on the Patreon that we have, which plug is patreon.com/the Kingcast. Of course, I'm contractually obligated to point that out. So we're doing 2 episodes a week. You know, it's gonna happen where we run out of standard things to say. And so my hope for the show is that it gets weirder as it goes on.
Yeah.
And that you know, now that we feel like we've sort of mastered the format that we set out for ourselves, we are taking bigger swings with the format of the show and changing it up a little bit here and there. And you know, we haven't gotten any pushback on that. You know, we've been very rigid about it, but I don't think the listeners really give a shit.
No, they don't. It's you know, for anybody who's listening who hasn't listened to our show, it's a fairly simple idea. It's usually about us looking at a Stephen King adaptation in the original book, and we bring in a guest who picks the title, and it's usually something that they're very passionate about, and that helps us a lot too, because that's allowed us to repeat some titles. We've done a few Shining episodes, done a few Pet Sematary episodes. Done a few Salem's Lot episodes, and those are all very starkly different because our guest is the one bringing their own personal, you know, views and passions to this thing. So, like, we did for example, we did a Salem's Lot episode with Brian Fuller of Hannibal fame, and he had this amazing queer reading of Salem's Lot and what it means for a small town to hide secrets, and you know, and these, you know, European gents moving into the town and opening an antique shop, and how he read that as being very codedly gay when he was you know, a young queer man or boy trying to figure out you know, his identity and you know, the feelings he was feeling. And then we had an episode with Barbara Crampton doing Salem's Lot, and she didn't have that same background. You know, she was way more interested in talking about the Tobe Hooper adaptation, the TV series, the miniseries that he did, because that was something that she saw at a, you know, in like high school age, and it terrified her. So, you know, so everybody brings a different angle to it just automatically. So thank God for that, or else our show would be just about out of gas at this point.
Yeah. No, that's lovely. Like I definitely, because when I first started this, I was like, well, all right, what? Because all the heavy hitters have been talked about on podcasts, like monster wise, 400,000 times. Like you have 400,000 episodes on xenomorphs in some way, or Dracula, or this, and so
Kevin Spacey. Yeah,
Kevin Spacey. We're going to devote a week to Kevin Spacey.
Oh, that'll be popular.
And then I'm going to shower for 2 weeks. But so usually how I do things is either I have a topic, me or one of the co-hosts will have an idea for a topic we really want to find a guest for, or sometimes, especially in the earlier days, we have an idea for a great guest, and then bring them on like y'all do to talk about whatever they're passionate about.
Right.
And we've been fortunate to cover a whole bunch of random stuff like Grim Reapers, and we did an episode on biblically accurate angels, Jinn, like really cool out there stuff. And so
you know who's obsessed with Jinns is Kumail Nanjiani. He's been on the show a couple of times.
Really?
Yeah. And like he's brought it up multiple times, of that being a big like cultural thing for him growing up, and that his dad used to freak him out by like telling him like a Jinn was under his bed or something.
Oh, that is the coolest ever.
Like wasn't Kumail's dad like placing a radio around the house or something? Or like a fucking like a walkie-talkie,
a receiver, and he would like talk
and then
through
talking through it like Kumail.
Yeah, I had a friend back when I lived in Chicago who had extensive stories about her family's interaction with Jinn, and it was the coolest thing ever. And now I really want to have him on the show and have a supplementary episode.
Have you discussed Creature from the Black Lagoon yet, or Lagoon Monsters?
Our second episode we did, but that is one of my favorite classic horror films of all time, and I would happily talk about it again.
Yeah, I think that's my. I mean, I grew up like kind of obsessed with monsters and stuff, and I can draw. I don't use it like I don't use that talent much. I don't have much use for it because that's not what I'm doing. But I can still draw very well today. And when I was a kid, everyone just assumed I was going to grow up to be like a comic book artist or something. And I got repeatedly in trouble for drawing monsters and stuff in like Sunday school and normal school and all that shit.
You just say it's part of the Bible. There's a lot of really fucked up stuff in the Bible.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the
there's
church
like
folk
stone
got
giants
mad at me.
and shit.
The church folk got mad at me because one day they were like, draw a picture of Jesus, and I was like, boring. And I drew a picture of Frankenstein instead. not really, kind of like I was too young to understand that I was sort of making a joke of the whole thing because
they both came back from the dead. Okay,
that's right.
Frankenstein, much like Jesus, came back to life. I wasn't clever enough at that time to know what I was doing, but I think they took it that way, and they were pissed. And I gotta like at the end of Sunday school that like they called my parents in and read them the riot act, and I don't remember how that resolved itself, but I had a few situations like that. But I've always been like a monster guy, a creature guy. I love monster design.
Me absolutely too. Like, I always try and when it comes to a really iconic monster like that, take some time out to talk about like the performers, the exactly, because I think it's just so cool and clever and creative and beautiful.
You must have reached out to Doug Jones to come on your show, yeah? Have you?
Yeah, I haven't heard back from him because he's a busy gent, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, he's great. Super nice dude. If you can get him on the show, he's the best to talk to. We are very distantly acquainted. Like we've met each other a couple of times over the years. I met him just doing my thing because I wrote for a movie news site called Ain't It Cool News for a long time, and I
it's the one that Cargill was on too, right?
Yeah, and I did a ton of set visits, and like I remember I went to the set of Hellboy 2. And spent like one day kind of watching Ron Perlman, like, or more likely Ron Perlman stunt double, like running around the tops of signs and shit as he's it's like it's that scene whenever that giant monster is like attacking the streets and he's like jumping from signage to signage. And then like the second day of the visit, we were in a studio and Doug Jones was doing his like Angel of Death appearance where he had like the wings with the eyeballs and shit on it. And so we talked to him, but he was in the costume, which there was like a little crack in the skull plating on the front that he could see through, but he did it in character. He did like this chat with us in character. That is the coolest thing ever. It was the most bizarre, like creepy fucking thing.
And that's one of my favorite Del Toro designs.
Yeah, it's great. It's very loud in person because all those eyeballs were hydraulic. So every time they would like all open and close, you would just hear you'd hear all the motors running, and there's like 24 of them on those wings, so it was just 24 of that sound overlapping with each other.
I just want to have you guys on for like an episode just to talk random shop.
We got lots of stories.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I'll just say this. We are supposed to have we have to finish booking the episode because she's a busy lady, but Bonnie Aaron's on the show and in a future episode, folks at home, and she's extremely talented, so that'll be a blast.
Oh, I'm sure.
Nice.
But that said, I'd like to pivot into favorite Stephen King monsters, of which there are so many.
Right.
Do you find
and weirdly so few? That's something when I was kind of like scanning through my mind. There's a million monsters, but there's so few that like qualify as monsters. He does so many human monsters very well. Like Margaret White, Carrie's mom, is is horrible, is a bigger monster than most of what he writes about. Mrs. Carmody in The Mist is
very
a
much
huge monster. Annie Wilkes is a monster from Misery. It's like he does these human monsters really well, and so I was kind of racking my brain trying to find anything that wasn't Pennywise, right? Because Jack Torrance becomes a monster, but he's a guy, but like Pennywise is, I think, kind of the top of the mountain, right? That's the iconic one of.
I agree, and he's kind of a cheat too, because you're getting your Pennywise, so you're getting the interdimensional murder clown, like right out of the gate. Like, so you're just like on a, if you're building a pizza, that's just the crust, the sauce, and the cheese, baby. There's so much more about to happen here, because then he can transform into any monster,
so your werewolf, your spider original form.
Sure. He even turns into Jaws, the shark from Jaws at one point. That's why he is the ultimate Stephen King monster, and unfortunately I screwed up and introduced him at the very top of all this, because nothing else really compares, because as we just said, Pennywise is every monster. He's not just a monster, he's every monster. He's everything you've ever been afraid of, as he will tell you to your face if you ever run into him. So that makes him kind of the ultimate.
Though, I would point out that, like, when It Chapter 1 was coming out, like, we didn't know what Pennywise was going to look like. There's a description in the book that is very basic. He's just like basically a Bozo the Clown type clown, right?
Right.
And that's how Tim Curry did it. And then when the first pictures of Pennywise dropped from It Chapter 1, I remember that first image they released was him in the pipe, which led to a long running Twitter bit that I got sucked into involving the pipe. But you could see he had like little frilly laces and shit like on his clothing, and he was more of like a what would you call it?
Like a Victorian era,
like a
porcelain
doll or something.
Look.
Yeah. And I remember just clowning this thing, for lack of a better term.
I remember too.
And like, oh, they've over designed it, like it's overproduced. It's like, when Guns N' Roses finally made that Chinese Democracy album, and they spent like $50 million or something producing it, and it's like, what are you fucking? This is the most
like
overproduced thing.
Emerge like Pennywise every 16 years or so.
This is the original Pennywise design of Guns N' Roses albums, but like it was in context, it made much more sense, and that design worked, even though it was more intricate and elaborate than the Curry design. And I found that really interesting. I think it lost something in that the Pennywise design in the new one is not as friendly looking as the Tim Curry one
at face value.
Yes. And that's sort of intrinsic to the character, because you want something that kids would have no problem wandering up to,
right? Because there's a reason he takes that form first,
right?
Or it takes that form first, but it's just like this paper thin veneer behind which is like chaos and deadlights and suffering.
Right.
Totally.
Which is something that the movie version, the Muschietti version, gets better than the Tim Curry miniseries one. And it's one of the things I can give that credit for over. And I love the Tim Curry version of Pennywise, like the theatricality of it, the threat of it. I mean, there's kind of this, because Tim Curry himself, he's just funny and has like this sexual edge and like everything to it. It's a great mix, a perfect casting for that. Yeah. But one thing that the Muschietti version does that I just absolutely love is it really sells the fact, as you said, that the clown isn't what it is. And there are moments when his lazy eye drifts and you see that he just goes blank, and whatever's inside Pennywise in that second just isn't there anymore, and then it comes back and he reanimates. That to me is such a brilliant, subtle thing that is so off-putting, and it's done right away with the Georgie scene and the storm drain. And it's a genius little bit there. So
I would like to go back for just a second to something you said about Tim Curry Pennywise and how he has like a sexual edge to him. That's true. But also, like new Pennywise, a lot of people wanted to fuck that Pennywise.
The werewolf hand in
it's all the
particular.
ruffles.
Yeah, the Pennywise's daddy was like, a thing for a minute, and I think
was it really a thing though, or was it an ironically haha funny thing? Were there
no? This
like,
was a thing, dude. This is a thing. I've seen this happen, and speaking of movie monsters, it happened with Venom too. People wanted to fuck Venom.
No,
like I don't know why. I guess I know why. He's got the big tongue, and I guess with Pennywise,
explain why that's why people would be interested in that, Scott.
Because he would be good at oral, is what I'm saying. But there was look, man, there was a friend of mine started a Tumblr, and it was like just screen caps of people talking about wanting to fuck Venom when Venom came out. And there was, and I'm certain I saw something similar to this for Pennywise. Like this is an ongoing thing with the internet, though.
Oh yeah, because people did the same thing with the Babadook. I don't want to say it's an ongoing
thing. Oh right.
Yeah, people did the same thing with the Babadook, and then I started to see art of the Babadook and Pennywise together, and I'm like, why?
Well, that's a good match. I think they'd be good. They'd be happy together. Yeah. The internet wants everything to fuck. The internet wants everything to fuck everything. That's the whole Rule 34 shit. Like you can type that in, you'll fucking see the Simpsons fucking each other or whatever the fuck. You're gonna do not Google that. Please, you're probably gonna get on a list. I'm sure I'm on a list because I was curious about that one day. And I'm like, cool. Stranger Things are. The guy can't look at that. Thank you.
But then the internet is going to remember this conversation as you saying, I'll be on your list. And that's exactly what they're going to remember.
Yeah.
Because everything
I'm on all
twisted.
the lists. Just because the internet wants everybody to fuck everything at all times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that Pennywise and Babadook make a good couple, though. I mean, are we talking just pure sexual chemistry, or are we talking about a relationship? Because just from, a very basic standpoint, I'm wondering, what kind of conversation are you getting out of the Babadook at the end of the day? When you're sitting down to have dinner or whatever, it's just like, it's just screeching at you.
Well, I feel like you could talk about old movies.
The Babadook doesn't talk, though. He just screeches at all times. Like, you'd get tired of that bullshit.
They both feast on grief.
I'm not saying they don't have a lot in common. What I am questioning is the Babadook's ability to communicate that.
I feel like that's
a casual setting.
I mean, the Babadook could write it in a book. Could maybe communicate that way.
Yeah, he give Pennywise a pop-up book.
Pennywise is like, "How was your day, hon?" And the Babadook's like, and pulls out yet another pop-up book to explain what sort of day it just had.
Went to the grocery store.
Like, couldn't you just tell me? Why is it always a fucking pop-up book with you?
But I think the biggest point of contention for them is, I really never imagined this going here, and I love it, is that Pennywise would keep trying to entice kids into the deadlights, and then the Babadook would be like, give me the boy, and then just take them out of his gaping maw all the time.
Yeah, no, they
stealing Pennywise's kills.
They would have to 100%. Establish boundaries on, which children of which neighborhood they call dibs on.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's it's another thing. Is do they work together? Or are they keeping their jobs separate?
They have to.
They would have to, right?
Yeah, they have separate MOs. I feel like because Pennywise approaches the children first, and the Babadook seems to kind of entice almost the parents first to get into the house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So maybe they just carve off city territories like telecommunications networks do.
They go on a vacation together and they just find the nearest orphanage. Just go buck wild.
Oh, that's perfect. No, but I'm glad that y'all started with Pennywise, even though it's the kind of the big gun first, because when it comes to popular knowledge of Stephen King monsters and that connection, it's one of the ones you have to hit because because of Tim Curry's performance, because of the impact of the miniseries, and now you have two massive hit movies.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely one that people know.
I would certainly wager that if you took a poll, like went to any local mall, for instance, and took a poll on what title people associate with Stephen King, it would be right at the top. The Shining, maybe, but I think because of the movies just being in the popular culture right now, that's probably the thing that would pop up the most. Yeah.
I definitely eventually do want to do a standalone episode on The Shining and the Overlook, because a lot of people don't really think about it as a monster movie because there's ghosts and stuff and there's a human villain, but the Overlook itself is like an eldritch location that has a will. And so to me that the Overlook qualifies as a monster, but people don't commonly think of it like that.
I think that's fair. I would consider that a monster more quickly than I would say sign off on I don't know, the lady in the bathtub in 237 being a monster, or the blowjob dog guy, you know?
Yeah, because I think those
are ghosts.
Exactly,
you know?
those are ghosts.
The hedge animals
right?
might qualify. The hedge animals could qualify as monsters.
I could see that.
Yeah, but you're right.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
well, and this is talking about the book more specifically. The movie, it's
right.
I don't get the impression from the movie that the Overlook itself is this sentient thing, and I think that's probably because of Dick Halloran's big speech at the beginning, where it's more about like these impressions of things that have happened that have lingered. So it's not the 1408, the room in 1408. I would classify as a monster. Like
absolutely.
that thing is fucking with anybody that goes in. It's just mean and cruel, and you know that room in that hotel, in the Dolphin Hotel.
And it can play with like time and space and your perceptions, and like everything's fair game.
Right. There's a mischievousness to that room too. So that there is.
I think that the Overlook comes across as a monster more so in Doctor Sleep by a little bit.
Well, it definitely feels like a weapon in Doctor Sleep, and that's what Danny uses it as. You know, it's dangerous, and it obviously doesn't turn out too well for Danny doing it. You know, but yeah, you could say that the Overlook's like a gun almost that is used.
Exactly.
In the movie, in the book, the book more follows the Shining, the follow up to the Shining book, which at the end of that book, the Overlook burns down. So there is a similar like showdown at that area, but it's like in the burnt out husk of the Overlook, not the still standing remaining dusty version. Where like, and I love Doctor Sleep. I love Flanagan's Doctor Sleep to death, you know, but there is a little bit of a jump you have to make in that this place that was, you know, a murder scene that was supposedly shut down or whatever, that's still exactly immaculate, and all the murder scene stuff is still
just no one's been there.
Just the doors
flip
still on the lights.
So there's a little bit of jump, but it's too cool where you don't give a fuck.
Yeah. I feel like because Kubrick took license with The Shining, a point of contention for King, obviously. It's like Doctor Sleep the novel is a sequel to The Shining the novel, and then the movies are a sequel to each other.
That's the genius of Flanagan and Doctor Sleep, and we've talked about this a couple of times on the show, but it's, you know, that's the line that he had to walk there, is he made a sequel to both Kubrick's movie and King's book, and somehow married the two together in a way that you know nobody really thought was possible.
I found it pretty satisfactory. I was very happy with it.
Me too.
I think one of the more recent novels that I really absolutely loved was Revival.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So for the folks at home, because it's a little newer one, like pretty much everybody knows the basics of it. It's been in the zeitgeist for forever, by modern standards. I grew up with it, you know. But for Revival is a newer novel, the folks at home. So Charlie Jacobs is this young hip minister who comes to town, and this tragedy happens. I won't spoil it. It's not much of a spoiler, but you just need to know that a tragedy happens. And so it starts this fall from grace. He denounces God. He gets kicked out of the town. And he'd made this young friend, Jamie Morton, who grows up an addict. And he basically sort of rediscovers that Jacobs has started to rebrand himself in a way as a sort of a weird sort of faith healer.
Mm-hmm.
He uses electricity, we come to find out, which is something he'd been obsessed with the entire time. And he pulls in Jamie to he ropes him in for one final experiment, this big massive thing that he's been building towards his whole life. Jamie's really reluctant, but Charlie Jacobs claims to have discovered a quote-unquote secret electricity, which is what he claims to use in his faith healings as he goes around the country. And what we discover in his final experiment is one of the bleakest endings that I can think of in any Stephen King novel.
It's the bleakest. It's hands down the darkest ending he's ever written.
Yeah, it's existentially devastating.
Mm-hmm.
It's fucking horrifying.
Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, do you want me to say what happens at the end of the book?
Yeah, go for it. So spoiler warning, but
okay, huge spoiler warning, and I'm reticent to even talk about it because the power of revival comes from its ending. And I'll
right.
Well, I have more thoughts on revival, but for now we're talking about the ending.
Yes.
So he is Jamie is trying to bring back it's his wife, isn't it? Or who is it that he's fucking who's in the bed at the end? It's been a minute since I read it.
Just a second. I'm forgetting. I'm just spacing the name.
It doesn't really matter. What he's trying to do in his final experiment is get a window into the afterlife and find out what awaits us after that. He's got a very, very, very recently dead body in bed. Like I think when the fireworks of Revival's ending start going off, like she is alive, but then she dies. And while on the table, like flatlining, he uses his various secret electricity tricks to gain insight into what awaits us after death. And that's when you find out that reality, life as we know it, is utterly meaningless. That there is this other dimension called the null, where human beings are essentially enslaved and killed at all times by like a race of giant ants, who are driving them along, marching them through this post dystopian hellscape. And that's what awaits all of us after death. It doesn't matter how good you are, it doesn't matter how bad you are, like this is where you're going. And they're all like given a glimpse of this world, and and then the book wraps pretty quickly after that. I think there's maybe 20-30 more pages, and you do come to find out that the preachers, the secret electricity he was using to like faith heal these people, like drives most of them to suicide, of course, and then they end up in the null. And you're left with a main character who has this knowledge that once he dies, once his already very shitty existence wraps up, he's got this to look forward to. And it is just existentially crushing. And I'm assuming you're bringing this up because of the giant ant monsters. Yeah.
The giant ant monsters. And then also there's this, basically it describes it as this, like you said, this hellscape, destroyed city and ruins with a paper sky. So this thin veneer of normalcy in this chaotic dimension. And
it's Lovecraftian as fuck.
Absolutely.
Huge.
And then
Big
the
time.
only thing other than the ant monsters and the basically perpetual line of chained souls is this giant spider leg thing comes down from a being called Mother, who's supposed to be like the head of these, like this pantheon of unseen gods. And all he sees of it is this massive spider leg that is at the end of it is like a claw with human faces.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. A claw
King
made of
was,
faces.
swinging for the fences with this one.
Yeah, so that tries to merge into our world. So basically there's this thin veneer of reality, and this is not just like a bad afterlife you can get pulled into, like Pennywise can pull you into the deadlights, right?
Yeah, right.
This is like, no, what happens to everyone, like you said, good or bad, your grandma, whatever, is we die, instantly become like part of a slave conga line pushed along by these ant-like monsters to feed the, I don't know what they even do with the souls, and I don't want to think about it, beings that we can't even comprehend in this thin veneer of fake reality at the end of time.
There's this suggestion to that whole sequence that there is no purpose to it. I mean, it's unveiling the purposelessness of life itself, you know? And so my impression is that there is no purpose to whatever they're doing. They're just driving humans around like cattle and destroying them on every conceivable level, like physically, from their souls, just emotional, like in every sense of the word. They're being like annihilated, and that's it. You know, I don't know that there is a grander purpose to what those creatures are doing. It just seems like, and the name of the place, like the Null, the fact that it's called the Null, to me, it calls to mind just nihilism, you know? So I'm thinking that there is no purpose, that it's madness and horror and pain. That's it. It's so fucking bleak. And you know, some years ago, Mike Flanagan was announced as the director of a revival movie, and he wrote a script. He adapted it. This was going to happen through Warner Brothers, and then it didn't get made. And without telling tales out of the school, I will say that I got to assume that the ending played a role in their decision not to move forward with this. But
yeah, they're like, how do we market this ending?
Well, how do you market the movie at all? You know, because like that's the thing, you know, and that's what I almost got sidetracked saying a minute ago. Revival is sort of like, if you were reading Frankenstein from like Igor's perspective or something. You know, I know Igor wasn't a character in the, you know what I'm saying though? It's like a tertiary character who suddenly becomes the main character, and so he's like kind of he like bobs and weaves in and out of the preacher's life.
Yeah, he's like the stand-in for us, really.
Yes, yes. And so, like, typically in a book like this, you would follow Jamie, you would follow the preacher and be like, you know, his experiments over the years, and you know, he's a fucking supervillain. He's like Lex Luthor,
absolutely.
You know,
yeah, exactly. Like he has a tragedy, denounces God, and he's like, "I'll fucking show you."
Yeah,
like...
but the story is just absolutely not told that way. It's like told from, again, this tertiary character's point of view, which is that's super interesting about it, and that's what makes it. Like you'll read through Revival and it's like what 400 pages. So for like 300 pages, you're like, what the fuck is this? Like, where
is this going? Yeah, exactly. It's very slow in terms of pacing.
It is. And
it's good.
The guy's got a drug problem. Then he ends up working at like a radio station or something.
And you're like, I don't care about your
yeah.
Why do I care about your preacher friend?
Yeah. Well, like the experience of reading Revival is to see glimpses of this way more interesting story going on in the background, and you're like, why are we not following that guy? And then in the end it flips, and like suddenly like he's in the shit, you know. Now he's getting a front row seat to the most horrifying, you know, possible conclusion. That's the power of Revival, you know. I think it's my favorite King book of the last 10 years probably. It's just so upsetting. Like,
yes.
The ending was spoiled for me on that one, just casually in some.
Me too, to be honest.
I remember like I was looking up something for the show and was reading something about a completely different property. And then there was a paragraph that just casually spoiled the ending of Revival. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, that's right. You actually didn't read it when it came out. It was one of those you were saving in your rainy day books.
And then when it was spoiled for me, I was like, say what? What fucking happens in this book? Like, like you say ant creatures in some place called the Null? Like, what the fuck? And I immediately got the book and read it. And, You know, so I was spoiled going into it. I didn't, but it still horrified the shit out of me. I had trouble sleeping for a few days after that one, and
yeah,
that is not typically my experience with the average King novel.
Yeah, I actually had it spoiled for me too, because I had a general post. A friend and I were going to read some Stephen King together, and then I just asked over Twitter, and I engage with a lot of people that are big into horror, what people's favorite King novels were, and then you get a lot of the usual suspects, but then someone that knew me pretty well was like, "Have you read Revival yet?" And I hadn't. It was still fairly new, and they're like, "Oh, well, you'll really like it for this reason," and I'm like, I think I know what happens now. Cool. But
Right.
also I'm buying that book.
Yeah, it's a weird one because the punchline is almost the selling point of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how you would sell that. I mean, I'm picturing the trailer for a Revival movie, and it's like a preacher and a kid, and then it's a slightly older preacher and a young man, and so on and so forth, like a battle of
so like
wills.
A drug addict has like a preacher buddy.
Yeah. and this guy's doing weird shit with electricity, and maybe there's some shots from that final sequence where I don't know, a body is like sitting up in bed when it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And but like you couldn't show, and I don't know. Flanagan sent Vespe and I the script that he wrote for it. I'm not sure if he wants us like talking about that in any way, but I will say that he plays the ending a little bit differently, and I still just don't know how you would fucking market this thing. Yeah,
because the book is weird, because it's like the structure, because so little kind of happens. It's very emotional. It's a really good novel. I mean, okay, so a lot happens that is like really emotive, that builds character, like standard novel stuff. But in terms of a horror novel, it's not really horrific. And then it's structurally, it's kind of like if someone were like, I'm going to knock you out. I'm going to punch you in the face. I'm knock you out. And they're just talking at you for 30 minutes. And you're like, okay, this guy's all talk. And then he hits your face and your head spins around like a cartoon character.
That's a great description of it. Yes. But I mean, yeah, I would have loved to have seen, I would love to see a version of that movie that goes whole hog with it. But I cannot imagine a major studio putting it in theaters. That's a thing that you throw on. That's a thing where a streamer has, $50 million for you. Yeah. And they're just like, oh, it's a Stephen King thing. And oh, this guy's directing it. Okay. Well, yeah, go do that. Do you want to read the script? No, that's fine. Just go ahead. You would need that sort of that lack of a studio notes process in order to do Revival right.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a blank check, and just do your thing, and we won't check in on you for 2 months.
Yeah.
All right, but we got to get Martin Scorsese on this.
6 months later, they're in a screening room like, what the fuck did we just fund? Were those ants? What is this?
Honestly, though, I joked about Scorsese, but he would actually kind of be really, because this is Revival is in a lot of ways thematically similar to Silence, the Scorsese movie, because they're both very anti-organized religion, anti-faith almost,
and have a character you try and like find that's like fallen out of the faith they were once like keenly tied to.
Yeah, so so there you go. Revival of Stephen King's Silence.
Marty, this is cinema.
that'll sell 1 billion tickets.
I love it. I'm also so glad that we got to talk about one of my favorite King novels in a long time. I love it so much.
Good shit.
Are there any other great recent, or not even recent, are there any other great works whose creatures kind of really grab you, gents?
Well, to keep it on Stephen King, the werewolf in Cycle of the Werewolf is great, and brought to life, I would argue, more by Bernie Wrightson's illustrations in Cycle of the Werewolf than in the movie, or even via King's writing. You look at those images and they lock in your head. In my mind, that's what a werewolf looks like. Is Bernie Wrightson's werewolf ripping that cop's face off in a fucking cop car. Like, that's exactly what a werewolf looks like. The thing floating in the lake in the raft is another one. you know.
Yeah.
The blob, the oil slick or whatever it's described as.
The outsider from the outsider, who
Yep.
you know, that's another interesting dimension to the whole Pennywise conversation, is, you know, this idea that King has revisited on several occasions now of, you know, a monster whose species feeds on the emotions of human beings. And it's Pennywise, and it's fear. The last, this is spoiler for the Dark Tower, but in the 7th book you meet a variation on this creature that feeds on laughter. And then in The Outsider, it's you know, I would argue it's the same species of creature that is feeding on grief, you know.
Yeah,
I find that whole thing very interesting.
That's another one of my favorite recent ones, because the outsider, for the folks at home, the outsider basically goes from location to location. It is like Pennywise, a shapeshifter, and like y'all said, he's consumes emotion, but it's grief, and basically takes the face, typically, as we see, of someone in the town, and then commits the most heinous acts you can even think of, like terrible community destroying things, and then just sits back and eats the grief and moves on.
Yeah, it sticks around, and that's the thing, is it, because it's not the act of, because we actually see Pennywise like legit eating kids and stuff, but like what this thing feeds on isn't flesh and blood, and it might kill children, but it's doing it so it could see how that destroys the family, and then how that destroys the family of the people who lost their kid, and also the family of the person that it imitates,
right, and then causes fear in the community, and
right, and then the community starts fighting with each other, and that's what it sits around and feeds on. And it's that is such a barn burner book just by itself, because before you even get to any of the monster shit, it is just so compelling on the central question of how could this guy Terry Maitland, who is, you know, the little league coach and everybody's friend, you know, be accused of murdering a child, and also then, you know, you find out he has evidence that he was completely out of town. He was in a different place at a different time. So how can there be all of his DNA and fingerprints and security camera? How can two people or one person be in two places at the same time? And that's the central question of that. And then, you know, King, of course, answers that with a monster. And
right.
And that's something that he's been very focused on. Like the outsider creature is or variations of that has now popped up a couple of times since The Outsider. There's in his novella collection, If It Bleeds, there's another story of Holly Gibney, who's one of his like new favorite characters, a detective. She finds another outsider, and then, you know, then there's like little hints of the outsider kind of in later as well. It's more in the Pennywise vein, like directly tied to it, that creature is, but you know, but it's in kind of a similar vein of creature, and you can tell that right now that's what King's interested in, because that's what he keeps returning to in some form.
I really like that, like because you're right earlier that in especially a lot of his earlier novels, there were some absolute bangers with creatures like Pennywise in a fairly early novel, or beings they put on a human facade, but they have a lot more supernatural ethos, like your walking man, your walking dude.
Yeah, Randall Flagg's a big one that we haven't touched on yet. Yeah,
exactly. And I'd still like to, but I love that a lot of his more recent stuff, and I haven't read like The Institute.
There's
I don't know what
monsters in The Institute. That one's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more Firestarter. So
Cool.
like the shop comes back, and it's all about kind of these. It's like Firestarter or like Xavier's Academy kind of thing, where there's this organization that keeps kidnapping all these talented kids, and it's all them in this institute, for lack of a better descriptor. Yeah, for sure. And it's like them trying to figure out how to escape. So
like, oh, so it really is like you're saying the New Mutants.
it is.
I
It's
think I
New
saw that
Mutants
movie.
and meets Firestarter for sure.
Cool.
A creature from King Lore that is goes wildly unrecognized because no one seems to give a shit about this book is the little bald doctors in Insomnia.
Right. In Insomnia, right.
I love these guys so much. Their name, as their name would imply, they are literally little bald doctors, like little dudes, just little guys with bald heads running around in like old school doctor coats.
Right.
Each one has a giant pair of scissors,
Uh-huh.
and they're using that to like sever the fucking, what is it, like the soul or the essence of a person?
They're like Lifeline.
Right.
Yeah, kind of. It's been
on
so many fucking years since I read that book, but I love those little dudes. They're just scamps, you know. They're up to their old tricks. They're doing their thing, you know, and just destroying souls left and right. This sort of gets lost in any discussion about Insomnia because Insomnia is a book about abortion, and you know, that's going to overshadow any other. That's a big enough topic to overshadow the fact that this book also contains little bald guys with scissors running around cutting people's lifelines.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. And then like the big conflict is like two of them try and do a good job, and one of them's like, whatevs.
Like, yeah, one of them just goes rogue. It's just like, no, I don't. Yeah, I'm not into this. Fuck you. And then there's also like all the and there's also all the alien shit that King has done. You know, the Tommy knockers count as monsters. The aliens in Dreamcatchers.
Yeah, the shit weasel for sure.
Possibly the aliens in Under the Dome.
Yeah, I don't. Man, I have such a conflicted relationship with Under the Dome because I was very mad when I read that book and got it, 3,000 pages later, got to that ending. But we had, who was it? It was Zach Dion, actually. Shout out to Zach Dion, a fellow King fan and a very good, like, King is his beat. He's written for a number of places, but is a King authority, basically. And he came on the show to sort of like defend Under the Dome because Eric and I are like, fuck that whole thing. And kind of rewired how I look at that book because he was like, well, when you look at it, the whole novel is really about bullying and, you know, how that affects this, that, and the other thing for these characters. And that's why it's thematically appropriate that at the end, you know, the aliens in Under the Dome sort of, they're ultimately appealed to by their sense of right and wrong as it pertains to bullying. And I had never found that through line for it. And that did change my opinion of it and made me like it more. But I'll be goddamned if I'm going to read it again. You know, I might read that ending again, you know, but that's a long ass book, dude.
Yeah, that's how I kind of felt about like the ending of it. I'm like, oh, so they defeat Pennywise by bullying him?
Well, they do that in the movie.
Yeah,
that's
not in the movie. The ending of the movie. I was like, like, wait, why are they bullying Pennywise to death?
That's one of many sour notes, I think, in it chapter 2. I like a lot of what they do in chapter 2, but that whole extended, how we're going to beat him is. I get the idea of we're going to take away his power and not be afraid of him. That's great. That goes back to Freddy Krueger and all sorts of classic movie monsters. I get it, but to legit just turn it into a bully to the point where I just found this out a couple days ago. Actually, they put a kid in a Pennywise mask. Like when he shrinks down and before he he does like a pancake, does the pancake head thing that happens at the end. Right before that, when it's crawling backwards, they put a kid a kid, like they made like a kid body size Pennywise outfit, and they put a mask, and he's crawling backwards, as the adults are bullying this fucking thing and shouting at him, and then he turns into the pancake head, and it's once again
get in there, Tremblay.
Yeah.
And they shove him in a locker.
Yeah, you shiver.
Yeah, exactly.
Pennywise was wedgied to death.
Yeah, I should have clarified, because in chapter 2, like I don't know, I love chapter 1. I did.
Oh yeah.
And then chapter 2, the two things that I kept coming back to that soured it for me were, one, I'm like, why is it ending with them bullying Pennywise? It just didn't track with me. And then also, I know it's kind of like the novel to some degree, but I thought it was a little bit structurally repetitive, where it's like, okay, well, let's split up. Here's where I had an encounter as a kid, and then as an adult, and then second person, kid, adult. Yeah. It's like for all game. 5 of them, it was like a video game,
right? Because then they, unlike the book, it's all about them remembering, and that's why they have to go off their separate ways. And here they're like, now you're on a quest, each one of you, to find a totem.
Yes,
so we can put it in this magic Indian drum, and you're just like, what the fuck is really? That's your solution to this? I mean, listen, it was always going to be the toughest of the two.
Sure. Yes.
To do, and because the kid's story is just way more interesting. It just plain is. I think they miscast a couple of people. There's a lot of missteps. I'm a big fan of Andy Muschietti. I'm a big fan of what he did to design and set up this world. And so I want to put that out there, that there are things in chapter 2 that work extremely well and a lot of really good ideas, but it's on the whole, it's just such a misstep. And I say this, I went to the premiere of it, chapter 2. I had a friend that worked at New Line, and he gave me his premiere ticket, and I had his seat because he was like hosting the party, which I wasn't invited to, which is the real reason I don't like it, chapter 2. But I saw the movie and I was so excited. I'm sitting there, I'm in the lobby beforehand, and fucking what's his name, Jackson Robert Scott Georgie is like walking around taking selfies with people in his little tux, and there's fucking James McAvoy, and there's like all these celebrities and shit. I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be great. And I'm sitting there, it's at the theater in Westwood, and
you're fully nude.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm fully nude, fully erect, waiting for this movie, and
and nothing but like a yellow slicker.
Yes. And my friend who worked at New Line was like, oh man, what'd you think afterwards? I'm like, oh man, it's such a letdown. And he was just like, really? I love it. I think it's great. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, man, I didn't like it.
Yeah, you would say that the ending was like a fucking God of War quick time event that went on for 30 minutes. I've given that movie so many chances. I went and rewatched it not all that long ago. And it's like, once they get into that fucking thing where Pennywise becomes like a big spider monster, and they're like, they're kind of like running. Forever. Yeah, they're just like running around that room, and then they go into a side tunnel. Pennywise can't get into it, so then they like loop back around in this tunnel to another entrance, and Pennywise can't get into that, and then they go back to the original entrance. And you're like, what the fuck is this?
The entire film feels like a video game. It's like cutscene, and like I feel kind of bad because some of these particular moments really do work for me as an isolated, like as a short film.
Sure, there are moments that work for sure.
Absolutely, like the demonic Paul Bunyan. Like, yes, I actually liked how they did that scene. That was really cool.
Turned out really good.
Yeah, there's like a whole lot of stuff. Like, if I just take them in isolation, I love it. But I couldn't. Like, I remember about like 45 minutes in going like, okay, after the first person's like childhood thing and then adult thing in the same area, and they switched the second character, I'm like, it's gonna be like this the whole fucking time. And I was right.
Yeah.
And I was so sad I was right.
Well, and here's the problem is the thing that it works so well, especially with the kid's story, and what Muschietti does with it is the reason why that works is because you love them as a group, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You love the dynamics, you love how Finn Wolfhard's playing Richie and how he riffs on Stan, and how he riffs on Eddie, and how Eddie, dishes it back, and how Ben and Bev's, crush, thing going on, and all these dynamics work so well. And then and this is a problem with the book itself and in any adaptation is that it depends on you splitting up that group. and
Right.
they're just not as interesting solo. That's just the problem. They're not as interesting as adults, you know, because you're not as scared for them, and they're not as interesting by themselves.
And they also don't have like they didn't build those connections over so many years. They're like coming back together. So like that group dynamic is now odd and awkward and like, oh, I vaguely remember what happened and I don't really even know you anymore. Like that connection and that shared like us against this entity thing is kind of gone too.
Yeah. And you know, because we're running out of time, I do want to make sure I get this in there, but or in here. There's a shit ton of monsters and creatures in the Dark Tower series.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're falling out of the woodwork in every book.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big fan of those Taheen, the guys with the animal heads that are just barely being contained under those masks. I like those, and I like that final sequence in the Wastelands when they're on they're on the monorail and they're sort of like going through the geography, and they're encountering
all sorts of horrors.
All sorts of fucking. There's like
pterodactyl
monsters. There's
if you
like giant.
If you haven't seen or if you haven't read Dark Tower, imagine if you've seen Fury Road. It's kind of like that moment where they like see all those like long-legged creatures and shit in the fog. Like, what the fuck is going? This is a Western, you know,
it's
or
a
this
whole
is
other movie. Whatever's going on.
There's a whole other movie going. There's a whole sequence in the Dark Tower where they're going through the wastelands on a sentient, riddle-loving monorail that's gone insane. That's gone insane, and is, you know, when they reach their destination, it's gonna fucking destroy everybody on board. But as they're going through this thing, they're just seeing all these crazy things that would be their own fantasy series in their own right as they're going by them. But also, speaking of wastelands, Shardik, the giant robotic bear, is one of my favorite things. There's these things that are called guardians. They protect. Oh shit! That's my alarm.
The fucking cops, dude.
Yes, cops. They're here. But they're called guardians. They're there to protect doorways between Midworld, which is where this series takes place, and alternate world, sometimes Keystone Earth, which is our world, and blah 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 blah, all this stuff. But each one is protected by essentially a monster. In the Wastelands, there's a monster on our side that's a living house that like literally comes alive, and you know, this is, you talk about Overlook being kind of a monster, like this is a literal monster. Like the boards become teeth, and you know, and it forms a face and tries to eat a kid. And on the other side, there's like they pass by Shardik, who is this giant bear. We're talking like Godzilla size, like, you know, bear with a radar dish on his head because he's a robot.
And also, you find out that like the Guardians are all at the end of. Man, we're getting into deep nerd territory here, but like,
because just a heads up on the show, this is a deep dive podcast, and we always end by talking about really deep meanings and themes and stuff. So the weirder the better.
Okay, so Midworld is like divided into. I forget how many like points are on this compass, but let's say it's 12 or 16 or something like that. Right. And at the end of each of these, you know, those are the beams that are holding the tower at the center of the diagram upright. So Shardik is a bear who's at the end of one of these lines extending away from the tower somewhere in Midworld. And once you understand this, then you also understand that there are all these other fucking gigantic animals, guardians, that must be at the end of all these other things. So somewhere in Dark Tower mythology, there's a giant fish, I think is one of them. You know, ultimately a giant turtle, which also appears in It, you know, also comes into play here. That's gone, but you know, let's not go down that road.
That's its own thing.
Yeah, but I remember being like, once that clicked for me, that knowledge, which I was, you know, very young when I read.
This is one of many. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, holy shit. I want to see him encounter all of these things. No, you get one. That's it. You know,
well, I remember
it's such a great concept, and King just kind of introduces it, gives you a giant bear, and then it's just like, yeah, fuck you. You can figure out the rest. You know, like,
I remember
so awesome.
Right. I remember there was this one description, and the thing that got me the most was that it was kind of like, imagine like a Terminator bear, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like living flesh over this, robot,
Rotting
and I
flesh.
remember, yeah, rotting, and that's the thing as I remember is like he described like maggots and stuff like coming out of the drool of this bear, and that was
Right.
feasting on the rotting flesh that's hanging off of this robot thing. It is the coolest fucking random thing. Most random thing. So yeah, Shardik would be up there in terms of favorite king creatures. I assume we should also mention like Cujo, because he's more of a he's a monster, but he's a monster more in the Frankenstein vein or the classic Universal monsters, in that he's a tragic thing because he's just a dog. He's just a lovely, loving family dog that is, that is driven insane by rabies. And the way that King writes about it is you get glimpses inside from the dog's point of view a lot, which is something that obviously can't really come across in the movie.
Sure.
But from the dog's point of view, he's an animal herding, and he's just lashing out, and that's it. So that is, I think, a very early example of like King's sympathy for the monster. I mean, you can say that going back to Carrie, like, Margaret White is clearly the big villain of that book, but Carrie's the one that murders almost an entire fucking town, right? But you spend the entire book in her perspective feeling sympathy for this character, and when she snaps, you're almost like, yeah, screw them, they deserve it.
You're like, yeah, I get it, Carrie.
But but from a completely also, neutral outside perspective, she murders a fucking ton of teenagers, at the end of that story. Yeah.
There's also the Minotaur from Rose Madder,
right.
which is like another. This is this came out the same era as Insomnia. It was in that same window. I think Insomnia is 94 and Rose Madder was like 95, something like that. And Rose Madder deals with the same sort of world beyond our own shit that the Dark Tower does often.
Yeah.
And within that is we don't have the time to lay out the plot for Rose Madder, but this this woman ends up like ultimately like going through a mirror into this world that has a labyrinth in it that is overseen by a Minotaur who ultimately kills her abusive ex-husband, and he's a cop, right? Rose Madder, much like Insomnia, is any discussion of either of these properties is dominated by the issue at the heart of them. Where with Insomnia, it's abortion. With Rose Madder, it's spousal abuse. But Rose Madder is like, even more than Insomnia, is like a book that people just don't seem to ever talk about. No one has ever asked to talk about it on the show. Like, I've rarely seen one of our listeners pop up like asking for a Rose Madder episode. But there's some fascinating imagery in there, and the fact that there's a big ass like a legit Minotaur like in this fucking thing is pretty interesting. The book isn't very good, honestly, but it's wild that there's this Stephen King book out there where the lady goes through a mirror and ends up in like some of the like these sort of ancient Greece trappings, doing battle against a fucking Minotaur. It's fucking crazy.
I love it. I know you guys don't have that much time, and I just wanted to give you the floor for just one more thing, because there's we're a deep dive podcast. We love to talk themes and meanings. We've done quite a bit of that just organically. But is there any other thing anywhere in King's works about these that thematically really sticks with you while we have a little more time?
Well, I think the big thing, and we've touched upon it, a little bit, is his constant examination of religion and the monsters, of the faith that are faithful, the faithful monsters, the Miss Carmody, as we mentioned, there's a whole section of Salem's Lot that's examining, faith and misplaced faith. And that is something that comes up in King's work all the time. Revival is a huge, questioning faith movie.
Absolutely.
Story. So I think that's probably where I would go. Like, I don't know if I can think of a deeper monster, below the surface meaning. I mean, I guess you could look at Pet Sematary, as one of his deeper stories, and but it's a lot of the themes. It's either questioning religion and faith, or it is turning something familiar evil, which is Cujo, which is Jack Torrance, which is the entirety of Pet Sematary. Like those are the things that he keeps going back to over and over and over again. The outsider is that this is a nice guy, but he committed this horrible act on a child. It's like, but it wasn't really him, but it's still, even in Salem's Lot, the Glick boys coming back and feasting on their parents. And it's like, this thing that you loved that loved you is changed. And that is really at the heart of so much of King's horror. And I think that that's also, kind of an interesting angle for all these monsters, because they're not, Cujo, like we mentioned before. It's not something that's born evil that wants to take over the world. It's just something that used to be friendly and trustworthy that isn't anymore. And a lot of times these things are in pain, their own pain. And I don't know. I think that that's maybe the as deep as I'm personally able to get on these kind of readings. But
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, though, because it actually, to talk about a non-King property for 1 second, that those sort of themes really kind of I love how they're present in a similar way. And like Del Toro co-wrote The Strain, where the plan to promote this vampire infestation in the wider populace is to infect folks who will be driven by their corrupted love to go home to their loved ones and consume and turn them.
Right.
And so it's a similar thing where it's like these things that loved you, that entire thing is weaponized almost.
Right.
In a way that is so perverse, but really interesting.
Yeah. Agreed.
And a lot of that comes from, Del Toro obviously is very famous for having a love of the monster. Right.
Exactly.
And when you when you come at things from that approach, then suddenly it's not just black and white. It's not just this is evil, this is good. You understand the monster, and you understand their motivations. And if you approach it that way, then it does become deeper and it becomes more interesting. I mean, listen, I think one of the best things King's has ever written is The Stand. And that is a pretty black and white story, all things, said and done. There it is, in comparing it to a Western, it's a white hats versus black hats. The evil dudes are in Vegas and the good guys are in Colorado, right? And they're in Boulder. And it's about as cut and dry as that, but they do something really interesting with Randall Flagg in that he is this, and this cuts a little bit into my religion aspect, and my religion theory with King is that Randall Flagg is a cult leader, but could also easily be seen as just as much of a fire and brimstone preacher, right? Like that is that character. And the interesting thing about Flagg is that and the most fascinating part about him as a bad guy is that he seems to be all knowing and all in control of everything. And then that's his power over people, because he makes them believe that that's what he is. But like, the second that people start losing their faith in him, when they see that he doesn't really know what he's doing, like he just instantly deflates. And
he's a man, he's like a person just like us at the end of the day.
Yeah. But he's not, but he's so full of himself that he can't, he can't play it safe. And it is, so he has a crucial fault, he has an Achilles heel, and it's all in, his cocksuredness and his belief in his own cult of personality. And so even in The Stand, which is again a very black and white, good versus evil tale, down to the, God versus the devil, ending.
Right.
And the book cover is a person in white fighting a person in black, or a person, something with a big beak or plague mask or whatever the fuck is going on in that illustration. I still don't quite understand it, but it's but it's still, it's a person in white and a person in black, and they're in a a duel. And but even there, King, grabs onto the gray area with characters, and that's kind of what makes his stuff last so much, and why I'm so fascinated by his work, and to the point where I have dedicated over a year of my life to a podcast about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if there's anything else, I know you guys have to go, but
sure, there could be a whole podcast just talking about the Monsters of the Mist, which barely came up, but yeah, that we'll have to say that for another day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely gonna do. That's another one of my favorites. For some surprising reason, it's full of monsters, and I like it. And deep
human
themes.
And not.
exactly. And so, well, if you guys would ever like to stop by and talk that one specifically, or anything else ever, love to have you on again.
Of course. Well, thank you for having us. This was a blast.
Yeah, I had such a good time. And where can the folks at home, please remind them where they can find you, your stuff, your Patreon, etc.
Eric, you want to take this? You want me to do it?
Sure, I'll do it. We got we post new episodes every week, every Wednesday, and that can be found on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Just search for the Kingcast and you'll find us. We got a lot of good stuff coming up. Our next few weeks are all Suicide Squad cast members are coming on board leading up to the release of that. We got some pretty big doozies in the works for the fall, and if they lock into place, we're going to be crapping ourselves a little bit, but in good ways. So lots of really fun guests, lots of stuff to still cover there. You can find us on Twitter at Kingcast19, and you can sign up for our Patreon if you want. We have a lot of almost a year's worth of backlogged bonus episodes and commentaries and whatnot. You can do that at patreon.com/thekingcast.
Love it. Well, again, thank you so much. I had an absolute blast, and we covered some of my very favorite beasties from the bestiary.
Glad we could assist.
All in a day's work. Well, thank you to the folks at home, and we will catch you next time. Once more, I'd like to extend a special thanks to our guests this episode, and to all of you out there listening. From the dawn of recorded human civilization, we've been fascinated by monsters and the monstrous. They've inhabited our dreams and nightmares. They've been our protectors and our villains. They've symbolized our fears and vices, our hopes and potential. Fears of creatures and the night that nourishes them were key inspirations and fuel for the rise of human civilization, the need to get out of the shadows, behind the walls, and into the light. In many ways, understanding our monsters is an important part of understanding our world and ourselves. So thank you for taking this journey with us, we humanoids from the Deep Dive.